St. Paul tells us this morning, rejoice in the Lord always. I shall say it again, rejoice. And Zephaniah concurs, shout for joy, O daughter of Zion. Sing joyfully, O Israel. And both of them tell us, fear not, have no anxiety. Today, as Father Boom pointed out, we celebrate Gaudete Sunday, the third Sunday of Advent. And our theme today is simply rejoice. The Lord is coming. But how do we rejoice in a world that has so much suffering? How do we rejoice when we read of a 7-year-old girl dying on the border of starvation and dehydration? How do we rejoice when we have more than 821 million people suffering from what the World Hunger Project calls chronic hunger? How do we rejoice when it seems like each day we're confronted with a new tragedy, a new outrage, a new horror? Seems like every time I preach, I go through a litany of the current horrors of the world. But I think it's important that we keep it in the forefront of our minds always. And so we face environmental degradation, environmental disasters, mass shootings, endless wars, millions of migrants and refugees, racial hatred and violence, sexual hatred and violence, church scandals, deepening polarization in the church and society, and always poverty, sickness, and death. The list could go on. The constant barrage of negative news may leave us feeling uneasy, unsettled, and even depressed. I know it does make me feel that way. So how can we rejoice in the midst of all of that? Well, today, Gaudete Sunday gives us the answer. Advent gives us the answer. Christmas gives us the answer. In the midst of our pain and our sorrow, our God is Emmanuel, which means God is with us. St. Paul tells us in the second reading, the Lord is near. And Zephaniah says 2 times, the Lord is in our midst. The Lord is in our midst. We have a God who comes, a God who enters into our world, who pitches his tent amongst us and dwells with us to remind us of his unending love. St. Paul says we have a God that we can approach in prayer, petition, and thanksgiving, who will offer us the gift of peace beyond all understanding. Zephaniah goes even further. He says we have a God that delights in us, a God that is so happy with us that he will rejoice over us with gladness and renew us in his love. He will sing joyfully because of us. Our God sings joyfully because of who we are. Our God loves us and sends us his only Son so that we might have life and have it in abundance. So in the midst of all of our sorrows and all of our distress, we rejoice that God is in our midst. We rejoice at all that God does for us. Well, a few weeks ago, I invited Jeff Dietrich of the Los Angeles Catholic Worker to the University of San Diego to speak. And as the day approached, I became a little bit nervous thinking about how would Jeff respond to the University of San Diego campus. It's a campus that appears to be very rich, and it's a student body that is regarded as being very rich and privileged. How would Jeff Dietrich respond to this seeming abundance and richness? Remember that he worked for the LA Catholic Worker for 48 years. His entire life has been dedicated to the poor and the outcast. And in one of his books, he writes about a typical day that he has at the LA Catholic Worker. He writes, I get up every day and I make soup for the poor. And once a week, I sleep on the kitchen floor so that I will be able to get the soup pots on early. I wash dishes, I wipe tables, and I serve soup. I clean up vomit, and I clean up crap. I have blockaded the federal building to protest wars, and on occasion I have thrown my body in front of the city's dump trucks to prevent the property of homeless poor folks from being taken away. So I was a little bit worried. What was he going to think about this campus, about this student body? And to my surprise, when he arrived and spent the day with me and spoke at the University of San Diego, there was not one negative word from him. It was instead, everything was beautiful. Everything that he encountered was beautiful and wonderful. We had him speak in the room that's called the Harry Potter room at the library. He said it was the most beautiful room he's ever spoken in. Everything was so positive. And what he encountered was a person that was filled with joy and a person that was totally at peace with himself. And he had a wonderful and rich sense of humor. At the same time, The talk he gave was amazingly radical. He denounced the rich, the powerful, the privileged, all of those who make life difficult for the poor. He did it in uncompromising language. And yet, through it all and afterwards, there was still this same quiet peace and joy about him. And so I began to think, how in the midst of all of the things he encounters on a day-to-day basis, all of the things that his life revolves around, how does he remain so joyful and at peace? I suspect it's because he encounters Jesus every day in the poor that he works with. As Jesus said, "Whenever you do this for the least of me, my brothers and sisters, you do it for me." I suspect it's because he follows the common sense of John in today's gospel. Whoever has 2 cloaks should share with the one who has none, and whoever has food should do likewise. I suspect it's because, like John the Baptist in today's gospel, he knows who he is and who Jesus is. I am not worthy to loosen the thongs of his sandals. I suspect it's because he knows that God is in our midst, that God is with us. And so he rejoices, and he experiences the peace that passes all understanding. So as we encounter the difficulties of the world, the distress, the sorrows, we rejoice because our God is with us through it all. Our God comes into our world and celebrates us. And so we say with St. Paul, "Rejoice in the Lord always." I say it again, rejoice.